Here's a clip from Tarabuster with Tara Devlin.
Really nice to see you again, and thank you for writing yet another amazing and important book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, and another one I love this book because it's so packed with history, and I'm a big history buff, but also this history in particular, it almost feels traumatizing to read because I feel like I was born in the aftermath of Reaganomics. My father was a product of the New Deal. My family lived in a decent middle class life. My father was a garbage man, and because of the New Deal, we were able to have a nice house and go on vacation and whatnot. Except he was a Reagan Democrat, and it would drive me insane. And I feel like, maybe we're coming to the end of that story. I don't know. I hope I live to see it turn around. But I don't know. Where do we begin? Neoliberalism. The term itself, I know, is a little confusing to people because people, they think it's you're talking about liberalism. But what do you mean when you say, what is the term neoliberalism mean?
Yeah, the word, well, to begin with, the word liberal in the United States, of course, means kind of progressive. Mm-hmm. In Europe, the word liberal means conservative. Liberal economics in Europe is small government, low taxes, no government interference in the marketplace. What we would call trickle down or economic or Reaganomics or whatever. And so, when these guys got together first in Paris in 1936 and then in Switzerland in the 1940s, and it was a group of economists mostly, and most of them Europeans, with the exception of Milton Friedman. They were trying to figure out how to come up with a way to prevent developed countries, European countries, right, from ever again doing what had happened in their lifetimes, which was going communist like Russia did, fascist like Spain and Italy and Germany did. And they thought that economics was the answer to it. And they thought that if you could just get government out of the way and let the economists run everything, everything would be beautiful, or let the economy run everything. Right. And so they wanted to take European liberalism and amp it up. So this is neo is the Greek prefix that means new, and so this was the new liberalism. Right. So it's the word. But, we could call it economics if you want. It's the same thing. Reagan. Right. People look at what Reagan did, and they think that he was just throwing stuff against the wall. Oh yeah, let's destroy some unions. Let's cut taxes on rich people. Let's blow up the EPA with Neil Gorsuch's mother, this woman who had to resign in disgrace. Right. For threats of prosecution for bribery and things. Yeah. No, it was not random. He was not throwing stuff against the wall. He was following a script, and the script came out of these meetings in Europe in the 1940s. And Milton Friedman had been selling this stuff in the United States for 30 years, and finally Reagan came along and bought it.
And see, I'm of the impression people say, just like you say, that or speculate that they were sincere in promoting neoliberalism, that it was it was just a different way to get an economically vibrant and upperly mobile working class majority. I don't think so. I think it was a way to destroy the working class majority, the uppity working class. They didn't want the chaos of the 60s of the women saying, burning their bras, and people saying, hell no, we won't go to your wars. And that was a way. And it's also reminded me of, who was it who said that his job as the Fed chair was to create a certain level of worker insecurity.
Alan Greenspan.
Yes, yes.
In the Wall Street Journal. I'm inclined to believe that they were well-intentioned, although Mises in particular went to great lengths to justify free trade as a neocolonial policy. He talked about how there were master races and there were inferior races, and the white race was the most superior race on the planet, and therefore it had the right, Caucasians had the right to establish outposts in lesser developed countries that people of color, and subordinate them the way that England had with, for example. And at the time they came up with this, India was still owned by England. So, there was a fair amount of racism in there, and there was certainly a hell of a lot of classism. But I think that, Russell Kirk's stuff that I wrote about in my book on oligarchy, in 1951, he warned Republicans or conservatives, William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater were his two probably most ardent followers, that if the middle class continued to grow the way it was in 1951, that eventually it would reach the point where women and young people and people of color would forget their place and start demanding more. Yeah. And, he was largely laughed at and ignored throughout the 50s and even the first couple of years of the 60s. But then, the birth control pill was legalized in 61. Birth control was decriminalized by the Supreme Court for single people in 72, couples in 65. You had Roe v. Wade in 73. You had the Vietnam War and young people protesting and smoking. And of course, you had the civil rights movement throughout that era that was getting increasingly militant, and cities on fire and whatnot. And all of that combined in the early 70s, throughout the 70s, to convince Republicans to go back and read their Russell Kirk from 20 years earlier. Yeah. And when Reagan came into office, he felt that part of his mandate was to destroy the middle class, and he did. When Reagan came into office, the middle class represented 65% of Americans, and today it represents 45% of Americans. And when Reagan came into office, to be middle class, you could do it with one paycheck. Your dad is a garbage man. My dad working in a tool and die shop. They both worked with their hands. And he raised my dad raised 4 kids, and we took a vacation every year, and he bought a new car every 2 years. And he bought a house that he died in, and you could do that.
That's right.
Now it takes a 2-income family to do that. So
if that, exactly.
The same middle class.
Yeah, and in fact, in my family home now, there's a garbage man who lives there with his wife, and they rent their house. Now it's the house I grew up in, because they can't afford to buy a house. So that's the way things have changed. And
that's the post-Reagan America. We have seen in the last 40 years, Tara, we have seen a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the pockets and homes and families of the American middle class into the money bins of the top 1%, the morbidly rich.
And it's also, as you were talking, I was thinking about that Rush Limbaugh quote, "Some people are born to be slaves." That always strikes me as, that's really the underlying Republican theme in general. And it is really the theme in neoliberalism too, because they're willing to jettison, they're willing to leave people behind. They think that, as like Ayn Rand said, what are some, I'm trying to remember, it's just paraphrasing, that some people are grist to be fuel for those who can use it, or something. She says something like that. And they idolize these people. I mean, Trump literally gave Rush Limbaugh a Medal of Freedom, and he also gave Laffer a Medal of Freedom. Now that I'm thinking about it, the Laffer curve guy, which that's a total scam too.
Yeah, the other neoliberal economist. Yeah.
Right. And so this whole industry of making neoliberalism almost synonymous with freedom and democracy, I think is what, it's great that you wrote this book, so we are talking about it. It's like the cat's out of the bag, and now I think, because the generation who benefited from the New Deal is passing away. And then you have another generation who remembers the economically vibrant middle class, and they are rewriting history. It's almost as if it had nothing to do with government policy. Do you know what I mean? Where I just worked hard and played by the rules. Well, the rules at the time were, like you said, we had a 35% unionized workforce. We had top marginal tax rates of 90%. We were able to go to school without coming out of college as indentured servants, things like that. So it's everything that's stacked against us right now, and young people too, because they live in this. I don't even know how I don't know why they're as can be optimistic in a way, but they are very progressive, and they've grown up in this small world to see. You could see other countries how. No, if you have health care, if you go to the doctor, you don't have to. It's not Nazism. You're not going to a death panel or whatnot. You know what I mean? So I do believe that, I do believe that we're getting more progressive in general, and maybe we're seeing the end of this. But it still seems like the big if you watch the corporate media, it's as if this is America. Do you know what I mean? This is patriotism. This is freedom. And any challenge to it is, oh, well, you just don't like freedom. And I literally heard, what's his name? From Joe Scarborough. Somebody said something about when they were going over to see the Queen funeral or whatever. And they were talking about the American healthcare system. And he was, and Joe Scarborough was like, oh, well. That's just not our system, it's like supposedly, oh, well, this is just the way it's supposed to be. So, I don't know. It's, we certainly have our work cut out for us, but that's the other thing I like about this book, too, because you do give credit where credit's due, too. I appreciate, when you say that Obama, saving neoliberalism from itself with the ACA, and that I remember that too, because he was probably in my lifetime the most disappointing president. And funny enough, Joe Biden seems to be the most the president I'm most pleasantly surprised by. Really, who would have thought?
Biden's the first president in 50 years to repudiate neoliberalism.
I know, it's great.
Of either party.
Right? He seems to be channeling FDR more than Reagan, which, I mean, it used to drive me insane because Obama had the habit of constantly quoting Reagan, and it was like nails on a chalkboard to me. Quote FDR. What are you quoting Reagan? But Biden seems to be, he's quoting Reagan. He's quoting FDR, and that's good. So it's hopefully we are seeing, the change that we need. But I know you have some solutions here. What do you think about how will we fix this?
Well, we need to basically deconstruct neoliberalism. When Reagan came into office, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was who said this. I just remember seeing it, in 1980 or 80. One of his advisors was on television, and they said, what's your agenda? What's Reagan's agenda here? And again, whether it was David Stockman or Jim Baker, I just can't remember. I'm sorry, but he said our goal is to deconstruct the New Deal.
God.
I mean, they set out to do that, drop the top tax rate, do away with unions, do away with, regulatory agencies, right. Make education expensive,
right.
Price everything in sight, don't raise the minimum wage. In fact, do away with it if you possibly can. Open the world to so-called free trade.
Right.
So American companies could ditch their high-priced American labor and find, dollar labor anywhere they wanted. So I think that, my answer to your question is that we need to deconstruct Reaganism. We just need just step by step. I mean, everything that I just mentioned was what Reagan did to undo FDR, and
Right.
not just Reagan. I mean, right up until the last until 2 years ago. And so we need to raise taxes on the morbidly rich. We need to raise taxes on corporations. And it's not just to raise money, by the way. I mean, when corporations, when the top tax rate on corporations was 52%, when Reagan, corporations had a strong incentive to avoid paying taxes,
Right.
which is a good thing. And because what they would do is they would develop new products with research and development, which is tax deductible. They would open new stores, which is tax deductible. They would pay their employees better, which is tax deductible. They'd offer better benefit packages to their employees, which is tax deductible. All of these things lower their tax bill, and all of these things help grow the economy.
Right.
Since we dropped the top tax rate on big corporations, we've seen very little by way of real significant growth.
Right.
The decades of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Those 4 decades, every single one of those 4 decades, you had GDP growth for the entire decade above 3% for the entire decade. We have not seen that since 1980,
Right.
and it's because we dropped the top tax rate on corporations. Similarly, when you got a top tax rate above 50% on the morbidly rich, they don't take as much money out of their companies, which leaves more money for the workers. You've got Jeff Bezos, the richest guy in the world, shooting penis-shaped rockets into space. Competing with Elon Musk, another rich guy, shooting himself into outer space.
Grotesque,
and
really.
these guys want to pay their employees crap wages and fight unionization tooth and nail.
Yep.
When either one of these guys could end poverty in America tomorrow and still be a billionaire.
That's right.
And I'm not saying that we should therefore confiscate all their money.
Right.
But a top income tax rate that encourages wealthy people to not take so much out of their companies, but keep the companies healthy, is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good social good. So number one, we need to raise the top tax rates. Number two, we need to strengthen labor unions and bring back the right to unionize. Labor unions are democracy in the workplace, and we're really believers in democracy, and we think it's a good thing. We should have it in the workplace as well. And in fact, businesses worked better, and the productivity was higher, and everything was good when you had labor unions. And since Reagan gutted the unions, it's been a disaster. We need to break up the giant monopolies. One of the neoliberal things is don't enforce your antitrust laws. Reagan in 1983 instructed the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission to stop enforcing the antitrust laws. And that, of course, led to that explosion in the 80s of mergers and acquisitions, the M&A mania, Michael Milken, and, Street with Michael Douglas, and, greed is good and all this stuff. And the result is that, they stole our pensions. They busted the unions. They walked off with hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars of middle-class wealth and stashed it in their money bins. And now you've got every industry in the United States is dominated more than 80%, more or less, not all of them, but most of them, well over 80%, by 5 or fewer companies who operate as oligarchies, oligopolies. Excuse me. If Delta raises their prices $5, United does 30 seconds later. They all track what each other does. So we need to start enforcing the anti-monopoly laws. Biden's talking about that right now, and directing it toward tech. And of course, now your tech companies are running ads on TV going, don't.
Oh, yes. Don't stop innovation. Right, I've seen these commercials.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to bring back free college education, and we need to strengthen public education. Now you've got states that are trying to destroy public education, public schools, trying to replace them with private for-profit schools. But we need to bring back the ability to go to college with a part-time summer job, which is what I did. I didn't graduate, but for a while I did. And we need to strengthen our public schools. We need to make healthcare the commons like every other developed country in the world. This is we were heading down that road when Robert Ball wrote the Medicare bill legislation. He was very clear, and so was Lyndon Johnson. Both of them on the record said that they wrote this legislation so that with a minor tweak, just deleting the sentences that referred to the age 65, it could be a national health care program. There it is, Medicare for all. We need to raise the minimum wage and basically do away with slave labor, with poverty wages.
Yeah.
And finally, and I think one of the most important things is we need to go back to the plan that Alexander Hamilton laid out in 1793 in his, or 1791 rather, in his 11-point plan for American manufacturers, also known as the American Plan, which Reagan abandoned, and go back to a tariff-based protective of American industry trade policy.
Right.
We need a comprehensive industrial policy for the United States to reindustrialize this country, because that is what produces the wealth of nations. You and I can engage in service stuff all day long.
Right.
I can wash your car, you can mow my lawn.
Right.
We pay each other to do it, but we're not producing wealth.
Yeah.
Adam
exactly.
Smith laid this out in Wealth of Nations in 1776. He said, if a tree limb is laying on the ground in the forest, it has no intrinsic value, but if you add human labor to it and turn it into an axe handle, you now have something that has a measurable, quantifiable value, and it will have that value for decades.
Right.
That now is part of the wealth of the nation. You can only build wealth through manufacturing.
Right.
And we shipped 60,000 factories and 15 million jobs to China.
Right.
All we accomplished was making China rich.
Yeah, and a few people at the top too, and exploding, the gap between rich and poor. And I always talk about on my show, what the question should be: what is the meaning of an economy? Is it to make a few people very rich, or is this whole democracy thing? Isn't this why people died? People put their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on the line so we could escape the intergenerational aristocracies. That's what they were fighting against in the monarchies. If you were born on third base thinking you hit a triple or whatever, you could become the duke. You would be the lord of this or that, and everybody else just awaited their reward in heaven. But that's not supposed to be this thing. And it seems like, everywhere you look with Republicans, too, they are whittling away at the pillars of democracy. And and it really is, everything you talk about, I think, needs to be presented as, or at least, advocated for, as the patriotic imperatives that they are. You can't have a democracy and a country with this kind of this wealth gap, right? I mean, this upward immobility. We used to be the most
unequal society on earth now.
Yeah, it's an embarrassment. Shouldn't we be better than that? And it's all greed. That's it. It comes down to greed. And especially when, and I think we've talked about this before because it's one of my bugaboos about healthcare in the country. That we don't, they always talk about how when Joe Biden, for example, he'll say, we're Americans, we can do anything except that, I guess, except have a healthcare system that doesn't needlessly kill 35,000 Americans every year and bankrupt millions.
If he can get a good enough majority in the House and Senate, I think so. There.
I think that's what I hope. I think that Biden wants to be remembered like FDR. I think he sees, this is his moment. This is his legacy. He doesn't want to be Reagan, or, he knows he wants to be somebody who, is remembered like FDR, who really did make a difference because people are still living above the poverty line because of FDR. And, the whole whitewashing of Reagan's, his legacy. I mean, the whole Reagan legacy project and all that. It's sickening. They who were we talking about recently? They were talking about Reagan. Well, I don't know why. Maybe it was because of the Queen or something. I don't know. Whatever. They would bring up Reagan and talking about how he's. Oh yeah, it was about something with when Gorbachev died. They did this whole thing about Gorbachev on the corporate media, and it began with Reagan. And, young people don't know the real history. Reagan was a horror show. He wanted to make ketchup a vegetable.
They also don't know the real history of Gorbachev. Gorbachev, when he was trying to transform Russia into a modern democracy, was using Sweden as his role model. And he said this out loud. He said that it would be better,
Wow.
because people in Russia had, free housing, free food, free health care, free education, that, to make a less radical transition to democracy, they should adopt the model of Sweden so that everybody had free health care, everybody had free education, housing was subsidized, at least for low-income people.
Right.
He thought that would be the best transition. But in 1991, when him and Yeltsin basically went to the International Monetary Fund and the United States and said, we need $1 trillion loan to make this thing happen, the IMF and George Herbert Walker Bush said, you're going to impose neoliberalism or we're not going to give you the money. That's why we have Putin. That's why you've got an oligarch and a semi-dictatorship in Russia. It was not what Gorbachev wanted. And he died, horrified by what happened.
Right. Well, yeah, that's terrible, really. And this is the real history, and people just don't know it.
That's
and
right.
Reagan. Whenever I have to fly to Washington, I'm like, Reagan National Airport. I want to puke, really, because they are giving this impression that he's, this wonderful, great president. When
the only people, I lived in D.C. for 7 years, and the only people in D.C. who refer to that airport as the Reagan Airport are Republicans. Everybody else calls it national.
Oh, okay. Well, now
nobody wants to say his name.
I know. Ugh, really? Because it's just it's such a the whole it's like what they do with with Trump or anybody else. They just try to rehab this, because as far as Reagan is concerned, before FDR was even cold in the ground, they were looking for somebody who could be him, be the Republican FDR, and they found it in Reagan. But, and I think at the time, the American people, they helped, I think, the dismantling of the New Deal. A lot of our problems can be traced to racism. It really does come down to that in this country. And in my opinion, with more, that's all the more reason we need to have universal health care and education for all and policies that work for everyone, because that's how we're going to unify this country, too. It's about time we start looking at ourselves and saying, yeah, we don't leave anybody behind. Like, for real. We don't leave you behind on the battlefield. We don't leave you behind on the battlefield of war. We don't leave you behind on the battlefield of sickness, of ignorance, of homelessness. I mean, wouldn't that, everything that you were saying there with, and I'm thinking of, as how we can fix this thing. I think, wouldn't that be great? It would be so beautiful to have a country like that actually puts those 11 points, what was it, into practice from Hamilton. And this is how, that's what Democrats have to do. And, what's that?
Bring back our prosperity.
Exactly. And for patriotism, it is a patriotic imperative to do these things, because, otherwise I believe we will be torn apart. This country is definitely at a crossroads. There's no getting around that. We either can go to a very dark place, as as somebody who knows history. I mean, we really have a choice here. We can go and rebuild in a way that works for everybody, or, there's more pain ahead. I hope not, though. But anyway, what's your next book?
Says there is.
Yes, I know. Well, when they raided Mar-a-Lago, I felt like I was a kid on Christmas Eve. So maybe when they arrest him, they'll be dancing in the streets, So that'll be a step in the right direction. But what are you working on now? You have another book in the queue, Thom?
Yeah, the next book will be The Hidden History of American Democracy, and
that's great.
It'll be out in the spring. And I've been living in the brain of Ben Franklin and the Iroquois, and
that's awesome.
Philosophers.
We need that. We need all these books, Thom. We really do. And I hope I hope everybody buys this book, but also your whole series, and it's so they're easy reads and they're incredibly palatable, and I just can't wait for the next one too. The Hidden History of American Democracy. That's something. Because the other thing, I mean, as far as that's concerned, because it drives me up a wall, Republicans rewriting the history of this country, constantly talking about how we're born out of Judeo-Christian whatever. We were not. So
no, we're the first secular country in the history of the modern world.
Right. So that's
First secular republic.
We should be proud of that and not, try to make us just like everybody. What's that?
The founders are very proud of it.
Exactly. I mean, we were born out of the liberal age of enlightenment, not out of, I don't know. Why would the founders have a revolution just to create another country like every other country, So, well, thank you, Thom, for coming on Tarabuster, as always. And it's always awesome to talk to you, and I feel like I'm in the presence of a master. So, and thank you.
Thank you. Sure. It's great talking with you, and thanks again for inviting me to the program.
Oh, of course, anytime. I'm looking forward to your next book.